affecting other places also. I think India is no exception. Probably, this is the peak summertime in India. That's why we're seeing these temperatures. Probably other places could also see. We'll get started, Robin.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, 5 o'clock. Fellow hatchery operators, friends from other segments of the industry, friends from Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, China, and other parts of global shrimp sector. And of course, the breeders from US. I welcome you all for this 2-day webinar on shrimp breeding strategies for success. Shrimp breeding per se plays a very, very critical role in the value chain of shrimp aquaculture. It helped the entire global industry. Actually, the industry used to be of size of 900,000 tons or so before the introduction of Vaname, and it played a catalytic role. The Vaname domesticated stock and helped the industry grow to this size to a level of 4.5 million tons in 2021 and about 63 billion USD in value terms. I mean, shrimp breeding definitely has contributed immensely. I mean, it helped the industry to grow in size by 5-fold increase. And India is one of the major beneficiaries of this. Indian production used to hover around 90,000 tons to 100,000 tons, 1 lakh tons, we call it in India, before the introduction of Vaname. And last year, we produced a record-breaking figure of 920,000 tons. I mean, Indian production has gone up exponentially. I mean, it increased by 9-fold. I mean, it could not have happened but for shrimp breeding. So shrimp breeding has been playing an immense role in the industry, and it continues to play. Having said that, Indian industry is at crossroads. Though we have produced 920,000 tons last year, the industry played a zero-sum game, probably a negative-sum game. No segment in the sector made money. I mean, because of the very reasons, because of the inflationary pressure on the inputs, all the input costs started going up. And we have a host of diseases. The industry is plagued with host of diseases, bringing the efficiencies down, bringing the success rate down. And I mean, the cash flow situation was also bad. I mean, actually, the cash flow cycle itself has become long because of the logistical reasons. I mean, shipments are reaching the destinations late, and this pandemic has upended the supply chain logistics. So I mean, we are not going through a good time, as a matter of fact, and we need to compete with countries like Ecuador, which have started doing well, especially Ecuador. I mean, it has started doing very well, and the productions have gone very high. We thought we could be the highest producers last year, but Ecuador has done more than 1 million tons. And this year also the production looks to be good. Month on month, they're exporting more than 90,000 tons. So this year they could touch about 1.2 million. And the major difference between India and Ecuador is the emergence of these diseases, And apart from that, they seem to have tweaked with their genetics. I mean, the breeding programs, and their animals started growing to bigger sizes. The growth rates have gone up. They have that inherent tolerance with those animals, and they could incorporate tolerance also into their growth rate, also the improved growth rate also into their lines. And they started doing pretty well, and we need to compete with them. And they have other advantages, like being near to the American market, and they have right product to reach out to Chinese market and European market, and they also speak Spanish. So I mean, odds are all against India and even other Southeast Asian countries. I mean, they also look to be sailing in the same boat. So we need to change at every level, right from the breeding up till exports. We need to change. We need to come up with the right portfolio at the end, and at the beginning we need to change with the breeding. We need to definitely come up with improved genetics, as a part of breeding. As Robbins was saying while we were talking, genetics is part of the breeding, and that also has to be improved to give better brood stock and help the industry to thrive. Because at the end of the day, we need to compete with, the Ecuador. I'm an Ecuador shrimp industry. So that being the case, we thought, we would engage the breeders first, of course. Breeders alone cannot come up with the solutions. We need to change the husbandry practices. We need to have better biosecurity. Then only we can produce good quality seed, and farmers can buy good quality seed. But there again, they have to come up with good biosecurity practices and good husbandry practices to help the entire sector to move forward. First we thought we would start with the breeders, and shrimp breeding, if you see, it is coming of age in the last 4 or 5 years. Like 4 or 5 years back, if you see, each breeding company used to have just one line. Today most of the companies have 3 4 lines. If you look at CP, they have you know the turbo, usual turbo, and they also have bolts, and they have their Kong, the robust line. Same is the case with SIS. They have superior line, which is fast growing, and they have their normal growth line, and they have hardy line, and they've come up with a new line called robust line, which they're trying in China. Likewise, Kona, you have strength. They have their usual balance line, and they have a speed line as well. And the new kid on the block, Benchmark, they have also 3 lines. They have a line called Protect, which is WSSV resistant. Then they have BMK Triple-Ite, which is a growth line, and they have a balance line called Yield line. And our the other Robin, API, they have also come up with a new line called Dragon. They have still that high vigor line. So what I'm trying to say is a lot is happening in shrimp breeding. It's coming of age, but is it enough? The situation in the farming is fast changing. I'm of the opinion that the breeding companies have to do catch up. It is changing on a dynamic basis. So, shrimp breeding companies have to engage with the industry, with India much more closely. Then we can come up with solutions. That should be the whole endeavor of the breeding companies, and the industry in India should support the breeding companies to come and work closely with us. We cannot work in silos anymore. So far, we're working in silos. Breeding companies are there in US. They do their own work, and we do our own thing here. Unless and until we come together and work closely, we cannot compete with a country like Ecuador. That's our take on the present situation. And uh, breeding companies are also an integral part of our value chain. Though they're not there in India, they are a very integral part of our value chain in India. If the industry in India, it doesn't do well, they're also going to lose business. Breeding companies are also going to lose business. So in our mutual interest, we should work together and see to that, you come up with the right product for our country. So much is changing here. You come, see what is happening here, and let people know what we have to do with your stocks, how we have to use your stocks, to get the full potential. With this, I would introduce the first speaker, the keynote speaker. It's none other than Robin McIntosh. I don't need to introduce. Everybody in the shrimp world knows him. And he's one guy who thinks very laterally, and comes up with the out-of-the-box solutions. You look at his past. 30 years back, he has done biofloc in Belize. Then, he started a breeding program in landlocked area. He created an island. Till then, the entire world used to perceive that your breeding program has to be located in an island. but he has created an island in a landlocked Thailand. I mean, somewhere in the middle of the Thailand, he has come up with his breeding program. And he has also, domesticated the indigenous, species of tiger prawn, I mean, he tamed the tigers, and he runs a very sophisticated tiger breeding program as well, Monodon breeding program. And everybody is trying to bring the stocks from US to Asia, or from Latin America to Asia, to start a program and all that. Whereas he has taken his stocks from here to US now, probably he might take the indigenous species of Asia, tiger to, Americas, that's also possible. He's capable of doing that, and I mean, he thinks laterally. He's an absolute maverick, and we are really honored to have him as a keynote speaker today. I mean, it's almost like the title talk, Shrimp Breeding for Shrimp Culture Success in India. And it's wake up time. It's really wake up time. Over to you, Robbins.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Yes, absolutely an excellent introduction, and you basically copied my talk. So I am just going to summarize what Ravi said in the next 35 or 40 minutes. But really an outstanding talk. When Ravi invited me to this, I thought, one, it's about breeders. So breeding is better for me than genetics. Genetics is mathematics. Breeding is the overall thing. And that's what I love about breeding. It allows a dynamic approach. It allows you to be totally immersed in an industry and see how you can help the industry from what I call the base of the pyramid. And so, it's about breeding. That enticed me. And I had just returned from Ecuador. And when I see what's going on in Ecuador, I realize I need to take a message back to Asia. It is wake up time. So let me start there. So the title of my talk, again, is Shrimp Breeding. Again, breeding is a lot more interesting than genetics. It's the overall encompassing of everything to create a base for success in shrimp farming. And so I'm going to start by going over what I call 2 countries and 2 stories. Each had the aim to be the first to reach 1 million tons in the modern era with exports, Ecuador and India. And in Ecuador, what we see is an accelerating growth line, straight line up. Trend is very strong up. And that trend is most likely going to continue. There's no sign that that trend is going to stop. The only thing to stop that trend is markets, but not what they're doing in Ecuador. India, on the other hand, was neck and neck with India up until a point of a few years ago when it broke sideways. And the trend line is either side or slightly veering down. And that's always a bad sign. So India needs to make adjustments if they want to get back on the track to challenge Ecuador. Both Ecuador and India came of age when EMS hit Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia got hit. It was the opportunity for Ecuador and India to come into the picture. And they both took advantage of that. And Ecuador continues to take advantage in growing, but India has hit a wall. So Ecuador, the story is intensification Ecuadorian style, using Asian technologies to increase productivity. They've closed their systems, so they're no longer restricted to harvesting on moon phase. They're using auto feeders, 1 unit per hectare. Aerators can go 6 to 10 horsepower per hectare. And they have finally recognized genetics and I believe health in broodstock, which has totally changed that industry's way it looks. If the last trip I made there, flying over the ponds for 3 days, I didn't see the birds I used to see. Used to always see a little bit of white spot outbreaks in the ponds, no more. They're basically at a very high degree of success right now. And so if I look at the future of Ecuador, they have 220,000 hectares of ponds. 4 years ago, they were doing 4 tons per hectare year. Today, many of these ponds are being converted using those intensifications up to 20 tons per hectare per year. And so if Ecuador were to to convert everything they have to those intensified ponds. You can do 20 tons times 220. They can do 5 million tons. And this is at stocking at 30 per square meter. And they seem to do that very well when they do this intensification. They also are unified and purposed. The industry is together with leadership. They've created the best shrimp in the world. It's safe, different certifications. They've done an excellent job of unifying that industry with a purpose of dominating the world in shrimp. And if you look at their logistics advantage, their containers cost $7,000 to the US, 2-week shipping. India is probably $20,000 or very high end, and 4 to 6 weeks. That's a huge advantage for Ecuador. Also to Europe, they have advantage. So I look at India. Okay, I went to the Indian shrimp farming Facebook page. Unfortunately, I have not been to India in 3 years or 3 years before the epidemic. So I haven't been able to see it personally, but farmers are jittery as price plummets. They basically, farmers explain seed being supplied to hatcheries, local farmer, inferior quality. Monodon black tiger works, but they can't get enough SPF. So on their Facebook pages, they show this SPF Monodon. This is not SPF Monodon. They show page after page of diseased and dying shrimp. It's basically a story that has no happiness. Let's see, how do I? So the biggest issue today, it's deflation in shrimp prices, but inflation in shrimp production inputs. That's a bad combination. Ecuador shrimp farmers see prices dive as production costs escalate. So they're being hurt too. And Indian farmers are jittery as the price of shrimp plummets. So the real question is, who's going to survive and who's going to thrive? Because one thing for sure, the world will always want shrimp. And the world has plenty of shrimp to choose from right now. Technology is always behind driving production higher and driving costs down. We've seen this with chickens. In 1950, there was very little chicken production in the United States, and the cost of chickens was a luxury. It was a Thanksgiving type of feast to get chicken. But as technology came in, production has gone up at a very steady rate. And we've seen improvements in the culture systems and in the genetics. And going to shrimp, we've seen the same thing. As we've improved the technology, we've increased the supply, and we can see that here. Here is basically the regression line for that production from 1970, and we can see now we are accelerating above that line that was established, that regression line. This is a result of the technologies that are being employed, but also we can see the price drops as that supply increases, technology improves that production efficiency, basically prices drop. So the question then becomes, will shrimp become as everyday as chicken? What will it take to get the world to consume more shrimp to allow more shrimp production? I look at the cost of production between Ecuador and India. The inputs, feed costs, about the same. Seed costs, not much different. Energy, not much different. FCR, actually not much different. Survival rate, if you have a non-failed pond, not much different. ADG, probably not much different there as well. But the failure rate, as I said, in Ecuador, is very, very low. Whereas in India, I think we can classify it as moderate and going higher. So the big difference between Ecuador and India is crop failure. This is where we must put our emphasis and efforts. Now, the effort always starts at the base. That's the broodstock. And broodstock is a combination of the genetics and the health of that animal. That feeds into the hatchery. The hatchery has to maintain that health and a good quality product so the farm can succeed. And then the processing and the marketing, which should be up here. will be success. But again, we're going to start at the base. Without good broodstock, the hatcheries cannot be of excellence, and then the farm and the processing. So the broodstock really is what I consider the base of the industry. And that's why I got into breeding, because when I brought the white shrimp into CP back in 2001, Dr. Lin, the leader of CP, recognized, because again, he was from the chicken industry, broodstock are where we have to start. And we need to build the broodstock program to be as strong and successful as we can make it, because that will be the base of anything and everything we do in shrimp. And he was correct. So this is CPF thinking on broodstock back in 2002. This is right after I introduced the white shrimp, the new SPF white shrimp. It was the second introduction of white shrimp into Thailand and Southeast Asia. The first introduction had been made by Dr. Jim Wyban, but unfortunately, growers didn't understand that health and genetics are different. They thought it was genetic. They would grow it in ponds, they would infect it, and it didn't work very well. So actually the Van Amme was in decline. We bring it back, again, true SPF. We try to educate farmers. It's not all genetics, there's health, and you have to basically get clean animals to do this. And so we realized very soon in 2003, 2004, the market was growing very fast for white shrimp. The success rate was almost instantaneous with introducing a clean shrimp, whereas before it was not very successful. So the thinking that we started with in 2002, one, we knew dead shrimp don't grow. So you have to have a shrimp that lives. If the shrimp doesn't live, forget about growth rate. But then growth is important because it lowers the cost, your FCR, your capital costs. And finally, size does matter in shrimps. Shrimp is the only livestock where it's priced on the size of the animal. So as you grow bigger animals, you get higher value. And also, and even I was surprised, even in Ecuador, they realized growing a big shrimp is cheaper than growing a small shrimp. So they're all growing big shrimp. Then we also established a philosophy of we never sell or give a shrimp to any farmer that contains a pathogen. We do not want to start a farmer out with a pathogen. We want to give a farmer a pathogen-free shrimp and then introduce biosecurity for whatever pathogens are in the environment that help protect that shrimp. Of course, that shrimp also needs some tolerance, but the big thing is we don't want to introduce pathogens to farmers. And broodstock and post-larvae providers carry major responsibilities. When we are producing broodstock, the last thing CP wants to do is send a disease to somebody, send a disease to another country, give a farmer a disease. Farmers work too hard. Farmers have too much at risk. So as a provider, we must ensure that we protect the farmer as best as we can. Here, as Robbie said, islands, everybody thinks of islands as SPF. Here as CPF executives, the first thing I was faced when I went to Thailand, we need to find an island. And so we spent weeks looking at all the islands around Thailand. Finally, I convinced them we don't need an island surrounded by water, because that means nothing if you have crabs that are infected and you have other vectors and things. Islands just are that, an island. So what do we need? Growth and size. And that's, again, as I said, the shrimp have to live. You don't grow fast. You don't go to big size if you die. But this shows the progression of our growth improvements. So in 2004, this is essentially a South American animal. It grew to about 20 grams in 140 days. Today, basically that same 20 grams is over here at 50 or 60 days. And we continue to add growth onto it. But I'll show you we've moderated that because, again, we run indexes. We try to make indexes applicable to what the farmers need and what the industry needs at the time. Here is a visual of the PLs. In 2002, PL12, 350 per gram. Again, it's SPF, so they're even size. They're beautiful. But in 2018, the same PL12 could grow to 40 per gram. So much faster growth, even at the PL stage. And looking at the harvest from the CP Turbo, which again is the main shrimp introduced into Southeast Asia, 40 grams in 90 days from a super PL. A super PL is a PL that is probably PL 25. 30 tons per hectare, 84% survival. So again, when it's done correctly, it's very, very successful. And in harvest size, we can show that the success of the program, and looking at harvest sizes from 2006 to 2021, this is CP database. So in 2006, we had 0% reach 30 grams. In 2021, over 45% were greater than 30 grams and still going up in terms of size. And we see this, I think, in the world market today. There's more and more large shrimp that are being provided into the market. And that is strictly a result of the genetics, many of the genetics produced by the CP program. So what is needed today? We need to have more predictability, higher survival rates, lower failure rates, predictability, because only with predictability and consistency will we be able to lower the required margins of farmers and get the prices down where it's good for the market and good for the farmer. So what I show here again is in 2010, we had a CV. This is the variance between survival of only 13%, very low failure rate, and an 87% survival rate. As we go forward to 2013, the peak of EMS, we had a 45% variance. But the problem is we've never come back to 13. Today, we're at 30%. And we're staying about this range at about 67, 70% survival, but a high variance. With that high variance, farmers need higher margins. If we look at chicken industry, we see a 95% and a 5% variance. They can deal with very low margins. Their cost of production on good ponds or on good crops of a chicken, it's about the same as that of a shrimp, but they can deal in very low margins because they have consistency. I used to think that shrimp were different than chickens. Shrimp just die, but that's not true because I can see in our biosecure nucleus breeding raceways where we're growing shrimp at 150 per square meter, we also get 96% survival. And this is 10 years of data and a 5% confidence error. So shrimp are no different than chickens in terms of the biology. They don't have to die. If a shrimp dies, there's a reason it dies. Down here, I show some of the same data, but sorted by stocking density. So in 2010, you can see it's very tight, very high predictability around the mean. Even going out to high density, it's high predictability. If we go to 2018, again, we have a scatter around the mean, low density and high density. Something has drastically changed in the animal. So shrimp broodstock show the possibilities. Here I got the chickens. Again, you can see 95% survival. It's similar when you're doing shrimp in a biosecure, highly contained environment as we do broodstock. So the chicken and the shrimp aren't that different. The big difference is productivity. You can get high productivity in chickens, but dealing in air is much easier than dealing in water. And so that's always going to be the case. But biologically, shrimp do not have to die. When shrimp die, there's a reason that they die. And so we don't operate in these very controlled systems. We operate in intensive, what I call mixotrophic or heterotrophic ponds. What does that mean? That means the pH goes below 8 usually. There's CO2 in this water. That's a stressor. There's high density, so there's lots of nutrients in this water. There's a higher amount of waste material in the bottom in this water. So there's stresses in this water. At low density, we do not have that. We have photosynthetic systems. We have pHs above 8. We have low CO2. We have low nutrient additions per unit to this water. So with the same animal, this is in Brazil where I have two farms, one using non-SPF. You put non-SPF in these stress conditions, you get disease. The same PLs go into an Ecuadorian non-stress situation, there's no disease. So when we go into stressful situations, the SPF is absolutely essential, but we also need to build a shrimp that will basically survive these stressful conditions. So the must: one, pathogen-free broodstock and post-larvae. So as I'll explain later, farmers do not buy broodstock, they buy post-larvae. We can provide good, clean broodstock, but if the hatchery doesn't keep it clean, the farmer doesn't see the advantage. So there has to be a chain here. It has to be the broodstock and the post-larvae staying clean so the farmer can have the full advantage of pathogen-free, and they do not get diseases introduced through the animal. Then we do need enhanced tolerance to disease because we're dealing with these stress conditions, and therefore tolerance becomes more and more important. And a new term, which I'll explain, which we really haven't talked about much in the past, enhanced robustness. Robustness and tolerance somewhat are linked, but are different as well. And some basic pond biosecurity. We can't forget the need to have biosecurity. It doesn't have to be extreme, but we need at least basic pond biosecurity to minimize the exposure to pathogens. And here's my own little personal editorial: with less reliance and use of pond chemicals. Those are costs. And unless you're absolutely seeing a gain from them that pays for them, this is a drag on our profitability. I can tell you in Ecuador, they don't use pond chemicals. So there's a cost advantage that they have right there. Wish I could get rid of this. So basically, it starts with a Nucleus breeding center. Here I'm showing the CP, one of our multiplication centers for broodstock. As Robbie said, they're inland islands. So this is all contained seawater that's brought on the site many, many years ago, and we just recycle it over and over again. This would be a typical CP SPF hatchery. The hatcheries in India, likewise, are SPF. What that means is the same way that we use broodstock. We have high levels of surveillance. So every hatchery will have a PCR unit. They'll have the most updated filtration and disinfection to ensure the PLs that go to farmers are SPF. And to have a true SPF program, you need constant surveillance. So we start the surveillance in the lab. We then have a CP central lab, which oversights the nuclear breeding lab, PCR, and then the government lab oversights everybody with the certifications. And what I show here is a broodstock from CP, only yellow Vibrio, no green Vibrio. So we've actually eliminated green Vibrio from the broodstock facilities. And of course, we know that the green Vibrio generally are where the issues arise. What PCR means is basically coming from a compartment that is certified as clean. You can't do clean shrimp from just a PCR test. PCR testing is all statistical, and you can always make a mistake by just not getting the right shrimp to test, or sensitivities, or et cetera. So there's a false sense of security. And where this shows best is when CP decided, after the success of the CP Van Amme, they would shortcut the way to SPF Monodon, where they used 8 primers of the day and tested every Monodon, and they only took PCR negative broodstock, and that became their SPF animals and hatcheries. But the result, it was a failure. You did not get the same result as SPF by just doing PCR testing. But what we can say is when we brought in true SPF shrimp from Nucleus breeding, so it's a site and not a shrimp test, we basically saw a tremendous reduction in white spots. So in 2001, 2002, 2003, most of the shrimp in Thailand were Monodon. And these were PCR tested. All the broodstock were PCR tested, but we still would have a 25, 28% failure rate from white spot. When we started introducing the white shrimp, so in 2006, we're now have the majority in white shrimp and continue, the white spot levels fell. It fell down to 5%, 6% failure rates using SPF, really Hawaiian stocks at that time. So this did not have white spot tolerance, but the biosecurity and starting with clean animals was paramount to success. We did have an increase recently in white spot, but we're finding an interaction between Vibrio and white spot. So as you get EMS and certain Vibrio in ponds, white spot becomes more sensitive, and there is a greater issue with white spot. To have SPF sites, you have to have constant surveillance of all known pathogens. So CP, we basically monitor all the pathogens, and when new pathogens come about, we put those on the list. We are constantly monitoring, and you can see as of 2021, we had 138,000 PCR tests for this one facility. I've got 3 facilities like this. So, you know, we're probably up to 400,000 tests since the beginning of the program, constant surveillance. And again, they have to be negative. Anytime we would have a positive, that would basically disqualify that facility from selling SPF. And SPF is about disease-free compartments. They're not about national boundaries. So when we talk about permitting countries or not permitting countries, we're really missing the whole idea of compartments. No national country is a disease-free compartment. But what we can do is we can establish disease-free compartments within countries. And that's what a nucleus breeding is. So this is an aerial of a CPF nucleus. It's inland. You can see this one is surrounded by rubber trees. This is our ocean here. This is the water that was this site was established, I think, in 2010. We brought in the original seawater, and that seawater has been used constantly since then. So we're not introducing new water that would be a risk. And it's totally enclosed, totally biosecure. So you have strict quarantine for founders before entry. So there is that strict entry. Once it's in, the boundaries are closed. Constant pathogen surveillance, list of pathogens being surveilled, and strictest levels of biosecurity go into making a nucleus breeding. Then a program, you've got the pedigree. CP, we have a complete pedigree. This is useful in monitoring things like the inbreeding and the traits and how we do our crosses. And then we have the process, which is a phenotypic process, family-based, and it goes from broodstock around and then next generation back up. And then we bleed off commercial families through here. We're at 22, I think we're at 23 generations now in this. We take 2, and then the rest of the families will take 12 or 15 families down to the next generation, and we'll start with 60 to 80 families. So we're continually rotating in this phenotypic process. SPF can also apply to Monodon. So here we have non-SPF. Here is SPF. PLs, and again, animals, and today. So totally different from the wild broodstock that we use, which again shows the importance of creating an SPF program with compartments that can do it. Now, Monodon is much more difficult than Van Amming. Monodon takes like 7 or 8 years of constant failure to get to success. It is a very difficult animal to domesticate. But once you reach domestication, this is no more difficult than Van Amming now. But it is difficult to get to that point. So domestication is very different than genetics. And domestication of black tiger, just like a tiger is difficult to domesticate for your house, this thing was very difficult to domesticate for our culture systems. This shows our Monodon, again, SPF compartment, monitored for all of the pathogens, and these are the pathogens that the SPF program is monitored for. And once you have domestication, so we could not start improvement until we had domestication, but once we have domestication, now we can start improving. So 2010 was kind of like the first year that I felt confident in actually applying some genetic improvement. And so you see that we've gone from an ADG of 0.3 to 0.5 in 2021. And our survivals have also increased over time. And over here, I show some typical yields in Thailand from using that stocking at 1820. This is really, I think, the sweet zone for Monodon. And they get 10 to 11 tons per hectare, good body weights, high ADGs, and high survival rates. And Monodon has proven to be a very good species in areas that have difficulties. So today, what has changed is we have challenging environments. Back in 2001, 2002, 2006, up to 2008, 2009, the environments were not as challenging as they are today. Today, the environments are changed. Success brings more success, which brings basically overpopulating. We have dense monoculture farms that run continuously. There's no slacking. So we build up increase the pressure on water, on the carrying capacity. We have deteriorating environments in general in the coastal environments. We have increasing Vibrio numbers from increased water temperatures of the oceans. And we have an increased number of pathogens that are in these culture systems. EHP, white spot, EMS, apins, running mortality in India. And on top of that, I put on here a decrease in world transparency of reporting. This is a huge disappointment when we can't be honest and report what we have so that we can all work together in the world. But in today's environment, it is very different than the environment of 1995 when white spot hit, which is unfortunate, again, for the world of shrimp. So robustness. Robustness is a shrimp's capacity to maintain a high health in an adverse environmental or pond conditions. And that's what we have today. So robustness is something that we need to add in to our index of breeding, and we are. The problem is, how do you measure robustness? And before you can put something in breeding, there has to be a measure so that you can measure and you know how to index it. But considerations to make are inbreeding, the genetic diversity, the heterozygosity, and the innate immune system that are in the shrimp. So inbreeding in sea populations, we basically tested this. So we did brother-sister mates, and we got an inbreeding value of 0.27. The general population is 0.03, 0.04. And then we created some hybrids that had an inbreeding of 0. And then we test those against EMS challenges. And you really can see there's not much real difference between an inbred family and even a 0 family. And this is probably not statistical. Growth is same. Inbred family, 0 family, and the typical CP family. There's no statistical difference. Inbreeding coefficient by both pedigree and by molecular determination for the CP families is 0.03 to 0.042. Stresses basically are very important in determining if a shrimp gets disease. Ecuador has every one of our pathogens, but they don't have disease. So the presence of a pathogen does not mean disease. So why do shrimp get disease with a pathogen, or they don't get disease and they carry the pathogen? And it's the stress. And as I said, intensive systems inherently carry stresses. So in our systems, we need to work to minimize the stress, but from a breeding level, we need to maximize the genetics that handle stress. So here I give, again, a laboratory challenge. It's with EMS. I take the families, got 9 families here. I subject them to 10 to the 4. Generally, it's enough EMS to start a disease episode. We can get very high survivals if there's no stress. If I add a nitrite stressor, the survivals go down. So stressors basically influence what's going to happen with disease in a pond in the presence of a pathogen. Then we have the family effects. and the effect of the innate immune peptide. So here on this, we have a lot of innate immune peptides in the shrimp. I measured the levels against the survival in the families. The blue is a high surviving family. We can see generally that's going to have the highest innate immune peptide. A low surviving family is the gray over here. It's generally lower in terms of survival against EMS. So in breeding, we want to maximize the innate immune peptides in the presence of stresses. So we want to increase the robustness through selective genetics of families and individuals.
Robbins, 5 more minutes for you, Robbins.
Okay, so basically, let me move on here. So we have that. We're going to start some walk back, use of DNA, fingerprinting, and high intensity within family selection done in fish. So we put the shrimp out with molecular markers in ponds. We take the harvest, and then we go back and decide what are the successful families. That will then be indexed so that we know what are the successful families, and then we can work with that for further improvement. When we look at diversity, we can see CP has a lot of diversity in our population. This is the South American diversity here. So these are all the programs in South America, and it's quite tight. But CP, we've got a higher level of diversity in the program to work with. When we look at heterozygosity, here is CP Kong. It's got the highest heterozygosity of all the families we looked at. Many of these are the South American families. So CP Kong has high heterozygosity. And we're constructing SNP panels and marker assisted. So we need to do challenges and determine the SNPs that identify characteristics. These will eventually go on the chips so that we can be much more precise in our selection. White spot tolerance, we have found certain SNPs that give a high degree. So this TT of this particular SNP gives a 65% survival in a white spot challenge. If it is a CC, it's only 5%. So we're now making a lot of advantages in looking at white spot tolerance and identifying it through molecular techniques. We will do other diseases the same way and characteristics. So we'll have a SNP chip that allow us to really zero in on the shrimp that will do best in the environments of these farmers. And finally, don't forget, farmers purchase post-larvae. We need SPF hatcheries. We need hatcheries that take SPF broodstock, keep them SPF, and produce healthy PLs for the farmer, because the farmer does not buy broodstock. And final, don't forget pond management. We always need to be aware of biosecurity. This is a South American farm with biosecurity, and it does very, very well. If you don't have biosecurity, you don't do very, very well, especially if you're doing intensive like this farm. And so thank you very much. Again, it's wake up time, Tom Petty song, wake up time, time to open up your eyes, time to rise and time to shine. So thank you very much.